The cuffs went on at 11:42 in the morning, in front of 90 guests, and out of every part of me they could have grabbed, they went for my wrists. Bad luck. Or somebody's homework. I was still holding the pen. Second floor of the city building on Halden Street, registry room, a clerk in a gray blazer waiting to make it official. My hands had been shaking since 8, so I'd asked to sign second. That's the detail the news liked best afterward. Groom too nervous to sign first. Lydia signed. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her dress with both palms, and walked past the 2 officers like they were furniture she'd ordered for the room. She didn't look at me once. 90 phones came up at the same time. My mother-in-law's cousin filmed it in portrait mode, because of course she did. Somebody's kid asked if this was part of the ceremony. The clerk kept saying "sir," while a man twisted my arms behind me, and I heard my own voice from somewhere far away asking him to move his grip. Please, just a little higher, above the joint, please. And he told me to stop resisting. I wasn't resisting, I was counting the tiles. 214 transfers, 41 million. Executed with a key issued to K. Rendell, Senior Architect, Fraud Systems, Orthvale Bank. Timestamp on the first one, 0312, Friday. They put the sheet in front of me an hour later in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner, and the first thing out of my mouth was the wrong thing, the way it always is. 214? If I stole from my own bank, I'd do it in one line. The detective didn't laugh. Ruiz. Square glasses, patient face, the kind of man who lets you talk until you've hanged yourself with the rope you brought. Explain that. 214 transfers is noise. Noise gets caught, I wrote, the thing that catches it. So you'd know how to make it quiet. Fair. I shut up after that. Here is the part you should probably know about me before we go further, because it explains most of my behavior and none of it flatters me. I spent 9 years in a place called Marlow, not a foster home, whatever the brochure said. There was a woman there named Pratt who dealt with runners by strapping them to the bed frame by the wrists, overnight, and reading out loud in the corridor so you knew she was still there. I was a runner. I was 8. So when the cuffs went on my wrists in front of 90 people, my body left the building about 4 seconds before I did, and by the time they sat me down, I'd already counted the tiles twice and started on the ceiling. Gabe Hartley's phone rang out 11 times that afternoon. Gabe pulled me out of Marlow when I was 17, paid for my courses, co-signed my first lease, walked me into Orthvale and told the hiring manager I was the best pattern reader he'd ever met. 9 years of Sunday dinners, 11 rings, then a message saying he was in Zurich and would call. Lydia gave her statement at 4:15. I know the time because it's on the transcript. She said I'd been asking her for credentials for months. She said it in a soft voice, and she cried at the right point. And her lawyer sat beside her the whole time, which is impressive planning for a woman who'd been at her own wedding that morning. At 6, a guard came to the holding room and told me my wife was here. I said I didn't have one. He said, "You do now." Dana Crane came in at 6:10 in a black coat, and the room stopped making sense. Not the coat, her. Women who look like that do not walk into a county holding room on a Friday evening. And the guard by the door dropped his pen twice in 90 seconds and pretended both times that it was the pen's fault. I looked at the table. It seemed like the safest object available. I'd been in rooms with her maybe 20 times in 2 years. Christmas things, 2 board dinners where I stood at the wall. She was 34. She ran Crane Capital, and she'd said perhaps 40 words to me total, most of them yes to somebody else's question. Lydia called her the widow when she was being polite, and worse things when she wasn't. 9 years of worse things, ever since her father brought home a woman 8 years older than his daughter and gave her a seat at the table. She put 2 sheets of paper down and slid them across with one finger. Sign both. I read the first one, bail, $500,000 posted, with conditions house arrest at a registered address, 30 meters, ankle monitor, 40 days to the hearing, standard. Then a line about the responsible party on the address, and the words blood relative or spouse. I have no blood relatives. That's the whole point of Marlow. I read the second sheet 3 times before it went in. This is a marriage form. It is yours and mine. That's why there's a line with your name over it. Her voice was flat the way a countertop is flat. No pitch, no push, and something underneath it that I couldn't get a fix on. You understand your stepdaughter gave a statement about me 2 hours ago. I read it. There's a very good chance I moved $41 million out of your family's bank last night. Sign the second one first, she said. The bail clerk leaves at 7. And here's the thing. I have gone back over maybe 400 times since. She never asked me. Not that night, not the night after. Not once in 40 days. Everyone else in my life asked, including 2 people I'd have called family, including the priest of my own conscience at 3 in the morning. She skipped the question like it was somebody else's business. I signed. My hand was steady by then, which felt like a betrayal of some kind. She capped the pen and put it in her coat pocket instead of leaving it on the table. And that small, wrong movement is the one I keep. She'd read 3 years of his fraud reports before she'd read 3 of his emails. Every Thursday, the internal digest, 40 pages and 1 section in it written by a man who didn't pad anything and didn't apologize for anything. She could recognize his paragraphs with the name stripped off. Nobody on her board could do that with hers. She'd known by 2 in the afternoon that the transfers didn't sound like him. It was the count. It was the noise. 214 is a man being framed by somebody who thinks bigger means worse. She did not tell him this in the holding room. She told him to sign, and she stood behind him while he did it, close enough to see the pen shake and stop. The house was in Faro Hill, past the reservoir, 40 minutes from anything with a sidewalk. Dwight Moss showed up at 9 that night with a case and the manner of a man selling vacuums door to door in 1994. He put the anklet on, tested the tether, and walked me through the rules like a tour guide. 30 meters from the base unit. 30. Not 31, not 30 and a bit. The system doesn't do vibes. Understood. Curfew's 24 hours, so no curfew. Ha. Kitchen, gym, whatever's inside the radius. Alarm goes to me first, and then it goes to people with less charm. He clipped the case shut. Also, ma'am, that's an $11,000 espresso machine. 12, said Dana from the doorway. 12, Dwight said, wounded, right. He left. She showed me a room at the end of the hall, said dinner would be at 8 if I wanted it, and went downstairs. No speech, no terms, no conversation about what the 2 of us had just signed. The room had a door that locked from the corridor side. I don't know if that was deliberate. Old house, old fittings, some contractor in 1974 hanging doors without knowing my life. I stood in front of it for a while. Then I went through the kitchen drawers until I found a flathead screwdriver. Came back and took the latch tongue out of the plate. 4 screws, 2 minutes. The door hung there afterward, doing nothing at all, which was the point. She was in the hallway when I turned around, holding a glass of water she hadn't drunk from. She looked at the screwdriver. She looked at the little brass tongue in my other hand. I got about half a sentence out, something about paying for the repair, and she said good night and went downstairs. I didn't sleep. Around 4, I got as far as the top of the stairs and had to sit down on the 2nd step, because the counting had started again, and it doesn't stop just because you know what it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tile, tile, tile. Out loud. Which is the humiliating part. She came up in a robe with her hair in a knot and sat on the step below me, which put her looking up, which nobody had done in my direction in my entire life. She didn't touch my wrist. I want to be clear that this cannot have been an accident, because everyone touches the wrist. It's where hands go. She took my hand, palm, fingers, the flat of it, like you'd hold something you were carrying across a room. Keep counting, she said. I'll count with you. We got to 200 and something before the sun came up. At 7:40, her phone buzzed on the step between us. Lydia's face filled the screen, tastefully lit, in a studio chair, with a caption running under her chin. My fiance stole from my father's bank the full interview. She played it at the kitchen island while she made coffee. At full volume, which told me something about her I filed away and didn't understand yet. Lydia had chosen a cream sweater. Nice touch. Nobody in a cream sweater has ever moved $41 million. I met him when he was nobody, she said. That was the part I loved. My father used to say Kai was the smartest hire Orthvale ever made, and I believed it, and I brought him into our house. The interviewer asked when she first knew. I think I always knew, Lydia said. You tell yourself a story about a man who came from nothing, that he'll be grateful. There it was. 9 minutes of airtime, and she couldn't help herself. Dana set a cup down in front of me, watched about 40 more seconds, and turned it off with the remote. She wrote that line first and built the rest around it, she said. Probably. Definitely. She does it in board memos, too. I drank the coffee. $12,000 of machine, and it tasted like coffee, which was somehow reassuring. Then I did the thing that people who've heard the rest of this story still yell at me about. When this is over, I said, we annul it, the marriage, 40 days, then I file, and it goes away clean. No press. And I'll pay the bail back. It's $500,000. I make $140 a year before tax. 12 years at $4,000 a month, 13 if I want to eat. And I'll set up the transfer on the 1st of every month so you don't have to think about it. I'd worked it out at 4 in the morning on the stairs, between counting. She stood on the other side of the island with her hands flat on the marble and looked at me for a while. 12 years, 13 if I want to eat. You put that in a spreadsheet. I put it in 2. In case the first one had an error. She picked up my empty cup, put it in the sink, and said, board meeting is at 11. Wear something with a collar. The money was not in an account waiting to be paid back. She had moved it into escrow against the bail bond a day earlier and had already been told by her own counsel that she would never see it again. Whatever the verdict, because bail money attaches itself to lawyers and the state like a barnacle. She'd said fine. 13 years, he'd said. Standing in her kitchen at 8 in the morning with a bank fraud charge on his head and a monitor on his ankle, doing math to get away from her by the year. She thought about telling him. She poured the second coffee instead. Crane Capital had its board on the 19th floor of a building on Vessel Street, and I got exactly as far as the elevator before I understood what she'd brought me for. 9 people around a table. 8 of them stopped talking when we came in. The 9th, an older man named Perrin, with a voice like a golf commentator, kept going on purpose. And frankly, since we're all being adults, the optics. The company's chief executive has spent the night with a man under indictment for stealing from a partner institution. 2 nights, Dana said, and sat down. Perrin waited for the laugh. There wasn't one, Dana. He signed on Friday. The paperwork says spouse. If you want the optics, that's the optics. Somebody's water glass went down too hard. A woman at the far end, Alvarez, Treasury, started paging through a folder that I'm fairly sure was empty. Perrin recovered and went for the throat, which was his mistake, because he went for it while looking at me instead of her. Mr. Rendell, you'll appreciate this is awkward. There's a live criminal matter, and this board has fiduciary. Have you finished? Dana said. I have not. Then finish quickly, because I have 1 sentence, and then I'd like to do the quarterly. The room did that thing rooms do when the person with the least volume has the most weight. Perrin finished. It took him 90 seconds, and he used the word prudent 4 times. Dana took a small black fob out of her coat pocket and set it on the table. It was the size of a car key. It had a plastic loop worn shiny at one edge, and every person at that table looked at it the way you look at a dog that isn't on a lead. He's my husband, she said, and he's the only person in this room who hasn't signed something he'd like back. Then she opened the quarterly. Nobody said a word about me for the rest of the meeting. Perrin's ears stayed a shade of red I'd previously only seen on marinated meat, and Alvarez read her empty folder for another 6 minutes. On the way down, I asked what the fob was. Clearing key, she said. Edwards. It freezes settlement across the platform for 72 hours. There's one. You keep it in your coat. I keep it on me. You understand that's the single highest value object in this city, and it's in a pocket with your lip balm. The elevator hit the ground floor, and she stepped out first. Then it's a good thing I married a man who catches thieves. Gabe came on Tuesday. He landed at 6 in the morning, drove straight from the airport, and hugged me on the gravel like he'd been holding his breath since Zurich. Same coat he'd had for a decade. Same smell of the mints he chews because he quit smoking in 2011 and never stopped talking about it. Look at me. Look at me. You're eating? Sometimes. You're not eating. He held me at arm's length and his eyes went wet. And I want to be honest here. I have never wanted anything more in my life than I wanted that to be real. Kai, listen to me. We fight this the smart way. We sat in the kitchen. Dana brought a pot of tea and then stood at the window with her back to us, which he read as manners. The smart way, it turned out, was a plea. They've got the key, the timestamps, the girl's statement. You go in swinging, you get 11 years. You take the deal, they'll take it down to 4, out in 2.5 with the time served, and I will be standing in that parking lot with the car running. He put his hand over mine on the table. 4 years and you're 29. That's nothing. That's a bad apprenticeship. I said the number out loud without meaning to. 41 million. 41. He squeezed my hand. They'll want restitution language. It's theater. Nobody expects a man to hand back $41 million. Dana turned around from the window. 39, she said. 0.4. Gabe's face did something small and fast, and then it was a face again. Sorry? The exposure in the charging document is 39.4 million. 41 is the gross before 2 of the beneficiary banks bounced it back. She refilled his tea without being asked, which somehow made it worse. It hasn't been reported anywhere. I only know because Orthvale sent it to us Sunday. Then Sunday's where I heard it, Gabe said. Easy as anything. Half a dozen calls, everybody's got a number. He stayed 40 more minutes and talked about his sister's kitchen renovation. He hugged me again at the car and told me to call him at any hour. Anna waited until the gravel noise stopped. That's the man who took you out of Marlowe. That's him, he said 41. Everyone says 41. It was on television. He said it at 6 in the morning after a night flight, she said, and he corrected himself before I finished the sentence. Nobody corrects that fast unless they're already holding both numbers. I told her she was wrong. I said it loudly enough that Dwight, who was arriving to check the tether, decided to wait in his car and eat his sandwich. I said she'd spent 9 years being hated by Lydia and had learned to see a knife in every drawer. She let me finish. Then she went into the study and came back with a printout from the Orthvale recovery desk and put it on the table face up. 39.4. Return to originating accounts. 9 hours after the last transfer. 9 hours. I sat down on the floor of a kitchen I didn't own, with my back against a dishwasher that cost more than my car, and did the arithmetic that my whole career is built out of. Nobody steals $41 million and gives it back before lunch. It wasn't a theft, I said. No, it was a load test. What I do is not what people think I do. I don't catch thieves with math. Math is what you show the auditors afterward. What I actually do is listen for rhythm, and I learned it in a corridor in Marlow, where the difference between Pratt and the night woman was 4 steps and a half-second scuff on the turn, and knowing which one was coming bought you 11 seconds to get back in bed. Everybody has a scuff. I explained this to Dana that night at the table with a legal pad, and she asked better questions than any auditor I've ever briefed. So a real theft has a signature. A real theft has 3. 1. The thief tests the exit before the entry. You always move a small amount out first to see if the road's clear. 2. The amounts are ugly, 411,612. Round numbers get flagged by humans. 3. The timing tightens. People speed up when they're frightened. Always. They can't help it. And these? No test. Clean amounts, and the spacing I turned the pad around. The spacing is identical, 214 transfers, and the gap never moves. That's a machine on a schedule. She looked at the column for a long time. They're all 4 minutes past the hour. They're all 4 minutes past the hour. Why 4? Because somebody wrote a cron job years ago, hated the top of the hour, because everything else runs then, and pushed it 4 minutes to give the system air. And then he kept the habit. People keep habits for a decade without noticing. I capped the pen. That's a person. That's not a system. Systems don't have taste. She said very quietly, "Can you find him?" I can find his scuff. Whether that's enough for a courtroom, I don't know. 36 days, she said, and slid the pad back to me. Ren Okada met me at the edge of the tether on Thursday, 30 meters exactly, in the gravel turnaround, holding a laptop bag like it was a live animal. Ren was 23, 3 months into the fraud team, and the only person from Orthvale who hadn't unfollowed me by Saturday afternoon. She'd sent one message on the Friday, "This is stupid, and I'm not doing the thing where I go quiet." They wiped your machine Monday, she said, but the mirror on the audit box runs a week behind. I pulled it before they got there. Ren, if they find this on you. Then I'll be unemployed and interesting. She handed the drive over. There's a second account in the log. It authenticates against the domain, and it's not in HR. It doesn't exist as a person. I got back to the house at 4 minutes past the hour, which I noticed and hated. Dana was in the hall. "That's the analyst," she said. "Okada. That's her. She stood very close to you. She stood at the tether line. That's where the tether is." Dana looked at me the way you look at a spreadsheet that hasn't balanced, and then she went to make a call. And I heard about 9 words of it, and none of them were about me. By Friday morning, Ren Okada had a new badge, a new desk in a different building, a parking space with a nameplate, and 2 men from a security firm sitting in a car outside her mother's apartment. She sent me one message about it. "Did you do this?" I hadn't. I went downstairs to say the word control out loud in a kitchen where it wouldn't be welcome. Dana was at the island with the drive already plugged in, the second account open on the screen, sorted by creation date. The account had been made 9 years ago, in August, the same month Orthvale hired me. We spent 3 days trying to make that a coincidence. The account was called SVC Recon 02. Service accounts get made in batches when a system goes live, and Orthvale migrated its reconciliation stack in the summer I was hired. So there were 19 accounts created that August, and 18 of them were boring. The 19th had been touched every quarter for 9 years. Password rotated by hand. Never used for reconciliation. Never used for anything until the last Friday in April when it logged in at 0309 and sat there watching while my key moved money. "It's a spare," Dana said. "It's a spare. Somebody built a spare set of hands 9 years ago and kept it warm." She was on the 3rd page of the log with a pen in her teeth, which is not a thing that woman had ever done in a boardroom. That's a long time to hold a knife. That's a long time to hold anything. I want to talk about the eating because it comes up later and I'd rather you hear it from me. I don't eat food I didn't open. It's not a diet and it's not a phobia with a nice Latin name. It's just that at Marlow there was a stretch in my 2nd year where things kept happening to whatever was on my plate. And by the time I was 15, I'd worked out a system, and the system was seals, wrappers, my own hands, my own eyes. I have eaten a lot of yogurt in my life. Restaurants are a nightmare. Dinner parties are a war. I got engaged to a woman who thought it was a quirk and told the story at parties as a quirk. And I laughed along at the parties, because that's what you do. On the 8th day, I hadn't eaten in about 30 hours, and I was on the floor of the study at 4 in the morning with a printout, And Dana came down and looked at me for a second and went into the kitchen. She came back with a pot, then she sat on the floor across from me, took the first spoonful herself, swallowed it, and put the pot between us. She didn't say anything about it, not one word. Not that night, not ever. Just ate first every time, for 32 days in front of me, like it was a step in the recipe. I want to tell you, I said thank you. I said, you're going to burn your mouth, and she said, then you'll have 30 seconds to think of something nicer. And that was the first time either of us laughed since the registry room. Dwight caught us at 31 meters on a Saturday. The turnaround at the end of the gravel is 30 exactly. There's a bench 4 steps past it that some previous owner put under a pear tree, and the pear tree is the only thing on that property that looks like it belongs to a real person. She'd walked out to it without thinking, and I'd followed her without thinking, and the anklet started up like a smoke alarm with a grudge. Dwight's car came up the drive in under 9 minutes, which is a personal best for a man who was, by his own account, at his sister's christening. 1 meter, he said. 1. I know. I have to write it. You understand, I have to write it. He was already writing it. This is a warning. This goes in the file. Next one goes to a judge who is not fond of me. Understood. He looked at Dana, then at the bench, then at the pear tree, and something in his face came apart. Was it the tree? It was the tree, she said. It's a nice tree, Dwight admitted. He tore off the warning slip, handed it over, and then stood there for a second with his hands on his belt. Your machine's descaling light is on, by the way. The espresso. It'll start pulling sour. I've been ignoring it. For how long? Since March. Dwight closed his eyes like a man hearing about a preventable death. He went inside, found the tablets in a drawer, ran 2 cycles, cleaned the group head with a brush he had in his own car, and made 3 coffees. And Dana Crane, chief executive of Crane Capital, laughed at something Dwight Moss said about milk foam. Out loud, ugly, with her hand over her mouth. And then she stopped and looked genuinely alarmed, like a woman who'd found a receipt in her pocket for something she didn't remember buying. Dwight left. She stayed under the tree until it got dark. 3 years and 1 month earlier, she had stood in a corridor at Holloway Medical and been told her husband had died of cardiac arrest at 4:50 in the morning. Edward Crane was 61, had a stress test in February that came back boring, and had spent the previous afternoon telling a fund called Peller Group that the clearing license was not for sale at any number, and to please stop calling her assistant. The glass door to the unit was locked from the inside. She put her hand through it. 6 stitches and a scar across the meat of her right palm that she'd learned to keep in her lap during negotiations, because men look at it and get ideas about what kind of woman she is, and she'd rather they get their ideas late. She had asked once for the medication chart. The hospital sent a summary. She'd asked again through counsel and been told the request was outside the scope, and the letter was signed by a lawyer whose firm, she found out much later, billed 900 hours that year to Peller. She kept the summary in the study, in a drawer, under the deed for the house. She had not opened the drawer in 2 years. She opened it the night Kai said the phrase load test and read the whole thing standing up. On the 10th day, I told her about Marlowe, and I did it badly in the middle of a conversation about something else. We were arguing about whether to tell Orthvale's compliance chief about SVC Recon 02. She said no, because compliance leaks. I said yes, because a 9-year-old service account is the kind of thing that gets quietly deleted on a Sunday. And then I said, I'd rather have it on a record than have somebody take it away in the night. They do that. At Marlowe, they'd wait until you were asleep and take, and I stopped because the sentence had gotten away from me. She waited. It was a children's home, I said. Pratt ran the corridor. If you ran, she strapped your wrists to the frame and read out loud where you could hear her. She said it was so we'd know somebody was awake. Dana didn't do the face. Everybody does the face. Lydia used to do the face and then hold my hand at exactly the wrong place. She said, how many nights? I don't know, 40, 60, over how long? 2 years, on and off. She nodded once and we went back to arguing about compliance, and I thought that was the end of it. 2 days later, I came downstairs and every internal door in that house was off its hinges. All of them. Stacked in the garage in a neat row like a lumberyard. There was a man with a drill taking the plates off the frames, and Dana was on a call about a bond issue, walking through doorways that no longer had doors. And she didn't mention it then or afterward. I went and sat in the garage with them for a while, that's all. Just sat there with 14 doors. Lydia came on the 12th day. She parked badly, walked in without knocking, and got as far as the kitchen island before she saw me at the table and decided to perform. Oh, she said, you've got him in the house. I've got him at the table, Dana said. The house is incidental. Lydia had a folder. Lydia always has a folder. It's her version of jewelry. The board's counsel has some concerns about capacity, she said, and put it down. Nobody's saying anything cruel. But you married a man under indictment 48 hours after he was arrested. And there's a duty of care question. And we think an independent evaluation protects everyone. An evaluation. Psychiatric. It's a formality. It protects you. I have replayed the next 10 seconds a lot. Dana didn't argue. She picked up the folder, read the first page at the speed people read menus, and said, "Who signed the request? It's a board matter. Who signed it?" Perrin, Alvarez, and me. Lydia lifted her chin. "I'm the CFO. I'd be negligent if I didn't." "You'd be negligent," Dana agreed, and handed the folder back. "Tell Perrin the meeting is Thursday, and I'll bring my own doctor." Lydia turned to go, and then she couldn't help herself because she never can, and that is the single most reliable thing about her. "He was going to leave you the bail money in installments, she said to Dana, with her hand on the door. $4,000 a month. He told me the same kind of thing for 2 years. He does that. He gives you a number so you'll feel like you're not being taken." I hadn't told Lydia anything about installments. Nobody in that house had, which meant she'd read it somewhere. And the only place it existed was a legal pad on a table in a room I'd been in with 2 people. I didn't say a word. I waited until her car was gone, and then I went and looked at the smoke detector in the hall, which is a fine thing to do when you know exactly which model you're looking for, and it takes you 11 seconds. There was a battery in it that had never been in a smoke detector. The vote happened on the 16th day. I wasn't allowed in the building. I was 30 meters from a base unit in Faro Hill watching a live stream of the Crane Capital investor call on a laptop at the kitchen island. And I remember the exact moment because I had my hand around a cup, and I put it down so I wouldn't break it. They didn't do it in the boardroom. That's the part I underestimated. Perrin did it on the quarterly investor call, in front of 400 people on the line and 2 trade journalists, in a voice like a man reading a weather report. "Before we take questions, the board has this morning approved a temporary independent evaluation of the chief executive's capacity, effective immediately, and pending its outcome, the office of the CEO will be exercised jointly by myself and the CFO. Access credentials have been adjusted accordingly." Next slide. Access credentials have been adjusted accordingly. That's how you take a building off somebody, not with a vote. With a badge. She walked into the lobby on Vessel Street at 2:40 that afternoon, and her car didn't open the turnstile. She tried it twice. Then a security guard she'd hired herself 4 years ago came over and said her name in the voice you use for people you're about to escort, and she said, "It's fine, Marcus," and walked back out through the revolving door with her chin level, and her scarf caught in the panel and pulled off her shoulder, and she stopped and turned and unhooked it and put it back on. 9 cameras. It was on a news site in 11 minutes. Not one of those headlines was about the clearing license or the vote or the fact that a board had just removed a sitting CEO with a badge reader. They were about the scarf and the coat and the walk and what she looked like doing it, and one of them used the word unraveling, which is the kind of pun a man writes at 4 in the afternoon and goes home proud of. She came back to Faro Hill at 7. 8-0. Took a call about the bond issue and handled it perfectly. Went upstairs. The bathroom door was one of the 14 in the garage. So there was no door, so I heard her. She ran the water first, which tells you she'd done it before in that house. She cried for about 90 seconds. That's all. And then she said something with the water running, and she wasn't saying it to me. She was saying it to a mirror in an empty room, and I got it in pieces from the hall. 34, he's 26. And when this is finished, he'll be somewhere with a girl who's 23 and doesn't come with a board. Then she turned the tap off and said in a completely level voice, "Don't stand in the hall, Kai." The doctor thing collapsed within a week. For the record. Her doctor was a specialist from Holloway with 40 years of testimony behind him, and Perrin's was a man who'd been struck off in another state. But that took 10 days, and in the meantime she had no card, no floor, and no signature authority. And the only thing she still had in her pocket was a clearing key that wouldn't open a door. And on the 19th day she put the other thing on the table. Not the folder, a share transfer. 6%, she said, board seat attached. "It moves on Monday if you sign." I looked at it for a long time. 6% of Crane Capital at that Friday's mark was $209 million. I remember the number because I recalculated it 3 times, the way you check a step you're standing on. Here's what I said, and here's why people who hear this story want to reach through the screen and shake me. No, it's a defensive move. With a seat, you can vote, you can call for the records, you can... No, Kai, I don't want your holding, I said. I don't want a seat. I don't want the share. And I don't want a floor with my name on the wall. I want the anklet off. I want 8 hours a day and a badge that works. And I want to go home to a flat that nobody's heard of. And I want to be somebody nobody is looking for. That's it. That's the whole list. She stood very still. And me? You'll be fine, I said. You've been fine your whole life. Which was, in hindsight, the second worst thing I said to her, and I'd only known her 20 days, so I was making excellent time. I didn't tell her about the smoke detector for 2 days. Not because I was protecting anybody. Because a listening device that the other side doesn't know you've found is the only free thing you get in a fight like that, and I wasn't going to spend it on being right in an argument. I took it apart on the 21st day with the drive Ren had given me, a soldering iron from a hardware shop that Dwight went and bought because I couldn't, and a lot of swearing. It was consumer grade. That was the insult. $400, sold to landlords and jealous husbands, streaming to an app on a phone. Whoever put it in the hall had walked in as family, stood on a chair, and clipped it in during a dinner party. Then I found the second one, study behind the bookshelf, on the shelf with Edward Crane's fishing books, which nobody in that house had touched in 3 years. That one wasn't consumer grade. I sat with the two of them on the desk in front of me, the cheap one and the other one, the little brushed slug of a thing with no brand on it at all, and I did what I do, which is look for the difference between two objects that are pretending to be the same thing. Cheap one, bought last April. Battery half dead. Somebody who wanted to know what happened in that house recently. Other one, dust in the seam and a manufacturer code that ended in the digits for a quarter 3 years ago. 3 years. Dana came in with the bond issue on her tablet, and I turned the desk lamp toward the slug and watched her stop in the doorway that no longer had a door. That was there when Edward died, I said. She put the tablet down on the arm of the chair, very carefully, like the chair might complain. Say the rest of it. Whoever's doing this to me now was in this room 3 years ago. We used the cheap one for 11 days before we killed it, and those 11 days were the best fun I had that whole spring. Here's the thing about a listening device. It only works if the people talking don't know. The second you know, it's a microphone you own. So we started having conversations in the hall. On the 23rd, I said clearly, at normal volume, standing under the smoke detector like an idiot in a play, that the Orthvale audit mirror was scheduled for wipe on the 2nd of the month, and that everything I had came off it, and there were no copies. 3 days later, Orthvale's audit box was wiped on the 2nd of the month by a maintenance ticket nobody could source, 6 days ahead of schedule, and Ren Okada sent me a photo of the ticket log with 3 question marks, which told us they're listening, they're fast, and they have hands inside Orthvale at ticket level. On the 25th, I stood in the same spot and told Dana that I'd never be able to prove where the cron job came from because the build server logs only went back 4 years. That one took 9 days to come back, and when it did, it came back wearing a suit. The trade press call it a defenestration. Perrin called it an orderly transition. What actually happened is that Lydia Crane walked into a room with 40 people in it and tried to run a play she'd built out of a sentence I'd fed her through a $400 smoke alarm. It was the Fen Sterling Investor Breakfast, which is a thing that happens twice a year in this city, where large money eats small pastries and pretends not to be shopping. Dana wasn't allowed a badge at her own building, but nobody had thought to uninvite her from breakfast. That's the flaw in taking a company off somebody with a card reader. Cards don't work on the outside world. She took me. I had permission from a judge for 4 hours, a written variance, and Dwight in the car outside with a coffee and instructions to come in swinging if the tether so much as sneezed. Lydia stood up during the question portion. Cream sweater again, she'd found her uniform. Since we're all being honest, she said, and since certain people are here, the investigation into the April transfers has one problem. And the problem is that the only person who can explain the build history is under indictment. The logs don't go back far enough. That's not my opinion. That's the technical position. 40 people. 2 journalists. Perrin nodding along like a dashboard ornament. Which logs, I said. Lydia had not expected me to talk. I'd been a wall decoration for 2 years. Walls don't talk. The build server. Which build server? There's one. There's 4, I said. There's the one everyone means, which rolled over in 22. And then there's the cold archive that legal made us keep because of the Fairbrook settlement. And then there's 2 mirrors in a different jurisdiction that exist so that the Fairbrook settlement stays true when somebody deletes something. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed. You said the logs don't go back far enough. How do you know how far they go back? She said, because I was briefed. By whom? By technical staff. Name one, I said, and I'll ask them the same question, right now, on speaker, in front of these nice people eating croissants. Perrin tried to come in over the top of it. This is hardly the forum. You're the acting co-CEO of a company whose CFO just described the internal state of another institution's build infrastructure at a public breakfast, Dana said. She hadn't raised her voice once. I'd let her finish. I'd love to know who briefs her. Lydia stood there with her fingers on the back of a chair. Her face went the flat matte color of the tablecloth, and she did the thing she does when she's cornered, which is smile in a way that shows the bottom teeth. I misspoke. You did, I agreed. Twice, technically, because the Fairbrook mirrors go back 11 years, which means anybody who was told the logs were gone was told wrong. And if I were them, I'd be very annoyed with whoever told them. I didn't have the mirrors. I want to be honest with you. I had a lot of confidence about the existence of a settlement clause and a strong suspicion about how lazy IT departments are with things lawyers make them keep. But Lydia didn't know that. And somewhere in this city, a man who'd been feeding her lines through a hall in Faro Hill found out at 9:40 in the morning that 11 years of build history might be sitting in another country and had to sit through the rest of a breakfast. The two journalists filed by lunchtime. Not about me, about a CFO who knew too much about a bank she doesn't work for. Crane Capital shares did nothing that day, but the tone changed, and tone is how boards die. Rung 1, she was quiet in the car. Then on the highway, without looking over, Fairbrook mirrors. There are no Fairbrook mirrors. There might be. Kai. There's a settlement clause requiring 11-year retention. Whether anyone implemented it is a completely different question, and I will die before I find out. I put my head back against the seat. The point isn't the mirror. The point is that for the next 2 weeks, everybody on that side has to behave as if there is one. Dana drove for a while. You've had that in your pocket since when? Since Tuesday. You let her stand up and say it. I helped her stand up and say it. I said the words into a smoke detector twice so she'd feel confident. And Dana Crane laughed the second time, still ugly, less alarmed about it now, and reached over and put her hand on my knee for about 4 seconds, and then took it back and drove like a person who had absolutely not done that. The deposition was on the 26th day, in a conference room on Marchand Street with a jug of water nobody touched. Whitaker had 2 associates and a laptop. Priya Raval had a legal pad and a pen she clicked exactly once at the start as a warning. He walked me through it for 2 hours. The key, the 0312 login. Whether I'd ever shared credentials, whether I'd ever been in financial difficulty, whether it was true that my salary at Orthvale was $140,000 while my fiance's family held $4.6 billion, which he asked in the tone of a man laying a plate down gently. Did that bother you? No. Never? I've been poor since I was born, Mr. Whitaker. It's not a mood. He read Lydia's statement into the record. All of it. He asked me for credentials repeatedly over a period of months. He would ask late at night. He said it was for a project. Do you dispute that? Yes. On what basis? On the basis that I've never once needed her credentials for anything, I said. She's the CFO of an investment company. I work fraud systems at a bank she doesn't work for. Her login gets me into a room I have no reason to be in. And if I did want to be in it, I'd need her second factor, which is on her phone, which never leaves her hand. It's the least useful password in this city. Whitaker made a note. You seem very calm about a serious allegation. I'm not calm. I've had 4 hours of sleep in 3 days, and I'm sitting in a room with no windows. I put my hands flat on the table so they'd stop. Can I show you something? It'll take 4 minutes. Priya clicked her pen. I did the 3 signatures, same as I'd done it at a kitchen table with a legal pad, in the same order, with the same examples. And I watched Whitaker's face while I did it. Because a prosecutor's face is a very informative object. The exit test. The ugly amounts, the tightening. None of those are present, I said, and the spacing is machine perfect across 214 events. Whoever briefed you on this file told you it was a large theft. It's not a theft. It's a load test, and the money came home in 9 hours, and I'd bet you my apartment that number isn't in the summary they gave you. Whitaker didn't answer that. He asked a different question instead, and it was the one that made the whole afternoon worth it. Mr. Rendell, are you aware of a reconciliation service account, referred to as SVC_recon_02? Priya's pen stopped, because I had never given that string to the state. It wasn't in the charging document, it wasn't in the discovery, and the only places it existed were a mirror drive in a house in Faro Hill, an audit box that had been wiped on the 2nd of the month, in the memory of whoever had been using it for 9 years. Where did you get that? I said. I'll ask the questions. That's not in your file. That string is not in your file. And I'd like it noted that you asked me about it, and I'd like to know who wrote it on the piece of paper you're reading from. Whitaker looked down at the page in front of him for slightly too long. Then he said, let's take a break, and one of his associates stood up too fast. In the corridor, Priya lit a cigarette she was not allowed to light, in a building where you cannot smoke, and said, somebody is feeding your prosecutor. Somebody's been feeding everybody. Yes, but that one's a career, she said. And I'd like you to understand what it means that he asked it out loud in front of a court reporter. He doesn't know he's dirty. He thinks he's thorough. The anniversary dinner was the next night, and I only agreed to go because the variance was already signed for the deposition and it covered the day. 90 years of Crane Capital. 200 people at the Ashcombe, black tie, the kind of room where the ceiling is the point. Lydia did the seating plan. Of course she did the seating plan. I was at table 19, not the far side of the room, worse, and cleverer. Table 19 was the external auditors and 2 people from the pension trustee, which is the table you put someone at when you want them to spend 3 hours being asked polite questions by professionals who have already read about them. My place card, said Kerendel. No title. Everybody else has had one. Dana was at table 1 with the chairman of the platform and a former minister. I sat down at 19. I want to be honest, I sat down. I had a monitor on my ankle, a deposition behind me, and a hearing in front of me. And I had spent 2 years in that woman's house being furniture, and the muscle memory is real. I sat down and I put my napkin on my lap, and I said good evening to a nice man from the pension trustee, who immediately asked me what my involvement with the firm was. Perrin gave the welcome. 90 years stewardship, prudence 4 times I counted, and a period of transition handled with care by this board. Then Dana stood up. She hadn't been on the running order. She was, at that point in the calendar, a chief executive under an active capacity evaluation, standing up in a room containing every institutional investor she had. And I watched Perrin's hand go to his water glass. 3 things, she said. 200 people put their forks down. 1. The bond issue closed on Tuesday at 98 over, which is 11 basis points inside where this board was told it would price. And the people who did that are on tables 6 and 7, and they should be applauded rather than me. They were applauded. It went on a while. 2. There's a rumor going around this room, and I'd like to save 400 people the trouble of asking about it at the tables. Yes, my stepdaughter and I have voted differently at every board meeting since March. Yes, this board has commissioned an evaluation of my capacity. It will report, and I will publish it, in full, whatever it says. Nobody breathed. 3. She picked up her glass, and she did not look at me, which is the part that undid me. My husband is sitting at table 19 with the auditors, and I would like the room to know it was not my seating plan. Kai, come up here, please. There's a chair. There was a chair. She had put a chair at table 1 next to hers at some point that evening, and it had been sitting there empty through the entire welcome address like a loaded gun on a mantelpiece. 200 people watched a man in a rented dinner jacket with an ankle monitor under his sock walk the length of the Ashcombe ballroom and sit down between the chief executive of Crane Capital and the chairman of a settlement platform. Perrin's ears did their thing. Lydia, 4 tables away, applauded with her hands about 6 inches apart, which is the most honest thing she did all spring. The former minister asked me what I did. Fraud systems. Retained by the firm? Under indictment, actually, I said, because the evening had gone somewhere strange and I decided to enjoy it. For stealing $41 million from a bank. There was a pause of about 2 seconds. Then he said, how much of it did they get back? And I said, all of it in 9 hours. And he said, then it wasn't a theft, was it? And turned to Dana and said, where did you find him? Holding cell, said Dana. Halden Street. I have been at a lot of tables since. That's still the best one. The script was mine. I'd been putting it off. Wren's mirror had the reconciliation stack on it, and somewhere in there was the scheduled job that fired 4 minutes past the hour. And I'd had it for 11 days, and kept finding reasons to work on other things, which is not like me. I opened it on the 28th day at 2 in the morning. It was 300 lines, old style. Comments written like a person explaining himself to a supervisor. A helper function named Clean Slate that did about 6 things it shouldn't have, and a loop that handled the retry logic in a way that no professional would ever ship, because it caught every exception and swallowed it silently, which is the cardinal sin. And I know it's the cardinal sin because a man told me so in 2017 while I was writing it. I wrote that function when I was 19. It was coursework. A batch processor for a certification module, the 3rd assignment, and I'd been so pleased with the retry loop that I'd shown it to Gabe over dinner at his sister's place, on a laptop, with pasta going cold, and he'd read it and said, this swallows errors, kid. Never do that in production. And then he'd sent it back to me with 2 lines fixed. Both fixes were in the file. His fixes in a production job on Orthveil's reconciliation stack. Signed by a service account created in the month I was hired, running for 9 years, firing 4 minutes past the hour because Gabe Hartley has hated the top of the hour since he was doing overnight batch runs at a clearinghouse in 2004, and everything on the network stampeded at once. I sat there for a long time. Then I went and got the pot from the kitchen and ate cold rice out of it with my hands standing at the counter, which is a thing I hadn't done since I was 17 and living on nothing. And Dana came down at some point and stood in the doorway and didn't say anything at all. It's coursework, I said. It's my coursework. I wrote the engine that moved the money when I was 19, and I showed it to him over pasta. Kai. He fixed 2 lines. She crossed the kitchen and took the pot out of my hands and put it in the sink. And then she held my face for a second, both palms, one of them with the scar. And she didn't say anything comforting, because she is not a woman who has ever had a comforting thing available. She said, then we need the 3rd fix. What third fix? You said he fixed 2 lines. Anybody who touched that file after leaves a fix. Find the third one, and you'll find who's been keeping it warm since. I went to see Gabe on the 30th day, which required breaking the law in a way that I'd like to state clearly was entirely Dwight's idea. The unit gets a firmware push once a month, Dwight said, eating a sandwich in the kitchen with the manner of a man discussing weather. During the push, there's a window where it reports last known position and doesn't update. 40 minutes, give or take. It's a known issue. I've filed about it. Nobody reads my filings. When's the push? Tuesday, 11:10. He took another bite. I'll be right here. If anything happens, I'll say the machine was descaling and I lost track of time, which is a lie I'm confident about because I have said it before. Donna drove. I sat in the passenger seat of a car worth more than the building we parked outside, with 40 minutes on a phone timer, and went up 3 flights to a flat I'd eaten Sunday dinner in maybe 200 times. Gabe opened the door in socks. You're not supposed to be here. I know. He let me in anyway. That's the thing about him. He let me in, he put the kettle on, he moved a stack of papers off a chair so I could sit down. And every single one of those gestures was one I'd learned my own manners from. I put the printout on his table. 300 lines, the 2 fixes highlighted. He read it with his glasses pushed up on his head, which meant he wasn't reading it, and then he put it down and sat opposite me and did something I hadn't budgeted for. He got angry. Where did you get this? Does it matter? It matters if you got it in a way that hands them your appeal. His voice went up. Kai, do you understand what a chain of custody is? Do you have any idea what a prosecutor does with a defendant who's been handling mirrored evidence out of a house in the hills? Gabe, no, you listen. You want to be clever. You've always wanted to be clever, since you were 17 years old and correcting me about ledgers. It's my coursework. He stopped. Then he leaned back and rubbed both hands down his face. And when he took them away, he looked 70 years old. Yeah, he said. It is. I hadn't expected that either. I gave it to them, he said. The kettle got loud behind him. In 16, Orthvale's recon stack was on fire. They needed a batch handler in about 4 days, and I had a piece of student code on my laptop that did exactly the thing, written by a kid I'd just walked into the building. So I cleaned it up, I put it in, and I didn't put your name on it. Because you'd been there 4 months and I wasn't going to hand the boys upstairs a reason to say the new hire's homework was running production? He got up and killed the kettle. It was a shortcut. It was a bad shortcut. And it's been sitting there since because nothing gets rewritten unless it breaks. Every word of that was plausible. Every single word. That's what nobody tells you about being lied to by somebody who raised you. It isn't that you can't tell. It's that the lie is built out of true things, and you've got no way to take it apart without taking apart the last 9 years of your life. And there's a man in socks in front of you making tea. The service account, I said. Sif Raycon 02, created in August, the month I started. Sure. That's the migration batch. There were 19. It's been password rotated by hand every quarter for 9 years. Then somebody's been diligent, Gabe said, and put a mug down in front of me, and I looked at it and didn't touch it, and he saw me not touch it, and something in his eyes went sad and old, and I felt like the worst person alive. You think it's me? He said. I think somebody kept it warm. Kai, I took you out of that place, he said it quietly. I sat in a car park in Halloway in 2011 and read a file about a 9-year-old with rope burns on his wrists. And I drove 4 hours the next morning. I don't want to meddle. I'm saying it because you're sitting in my kitchen doing arithmetic on me. I had 11 minutes left on the timer. I said, who else touched the file after you? And he said, I don't know. Which was the only sentence he said that afternoon that I'm now certain was a lie. And at the time, it was the one I believed the most. She was in the car with the engine off and her hands in her lap. Well, he put it in production in 16. Shortcut. He says he doesn't know who touched it after. Do you believe him? I want to. That's not the same shape of answer. I know what shape it is. I got the belt on. Drive, please. She drove. Somewhere near the reservoir, she said, the girl called the house phone. Okada, twice. She's got the diff on the 3rd fix. She could email it. She doesn't email things anymore because the last person who emailed things is me, and I'm in an anklet. She calls the house, Dana said, and asks for you by your first name. And when I answer, she says, oh, in a particular way. I turned in my seat and looked at her, and she kept her eyes on the road with the calm of a woman who has never once in her life admitted to anything. Are you asking me a question? No, because it sounds like a question with the question part removed. I'm telling you, Dana said, that when a 23-year-old says, oh, like that, she is not thinking about a diff. She's 23. I've got an ankle monitor, a fraud charge, and a wife. Yes, she said. You do. And she put the indicator on and merged and did not say another word for 9 miles. and I sat there working out, at a speed that shocked me, that I had liked that. The pear tree, day 32, 10:30 at night, 30 meters exactly. I put a paint mark on the gravel so we could stop being criminals about it. She brought 2 glasses and a bottle of something that probably had a story attached. I brought the legal pad because I'm delightful. Tell me about the numbers again, she said. The 3 signatures. I want to hear it in your voice, not on paper. So I did, and I got about a minute into it before I realized she wasn't listening to the content. You're not listening. I'm listening to you talk, she said. It's different when it's the work. Your hands do something. What do my hands do? They stop. She turned the glass in the scarred hand. Everywhere else in this house they're moving. Doorframe, cup, pen, your own knuckles. When you're explaining a system, they go still, and you look about 9 years younger, and I would like it on the record that I find that extremely inconvenient. I want to tell you I said something worthy of that. I said, the retry loop is bad, though. And she put her forehead against my shoulder for a second and laughed into my sleeve. And above us, the pear tree did nothing at all, because it's a tree. Then she said, without moving, when it's over, and you go back to your flat that nobody's heard of, will you take my calls? Dana, it's a scheduling question. I like to plan. You'll be running that company again by then, and you'll have 400 calls a day. That, she said, is a very long way from a yes. Lydia came back on the 33rd day with an offer, which tells you the breakfast had landed harder than the trade press knew. She didn't bring a folder this time. That was how I knew it was real. Dana was in the city. Lydia had checked. She'd always been good at the logistics of ambush. She came in through the kitchen door, sat on a stool at the island without being asked, and put her phone face down. 4 years is what they'll give you, she said. Priya Raval will have told you 11. She's wrong, and she's expensive, and she gets paid either way. You've been talking to my lawyer's opposite number. I've been talking to people. She turned the phone over, then back. There's a version where I withdraw the statement. Not retract, withdraw, on the basis that I was distressed, and I'd been awake for 30 hours, and I misremembered the timeline. That happens constantly. Whitaker would keep the case and lose the spine of it, and you'd be looking at a plea to something with a number in front of it that starts with a 1. In exchange for, you leave her. I laughed. I couldn't help it, and I regret it slightly, because it was the only genuinely useful thing she said to me that spring. She's 34, Lydia said. She married my father when I was 19. She has done this exact thing before. She finds a man in a bad month, and she is extremely good to him. And by the time he can breathe again, she's the only air in the room. Ask her how long my father was widowed before he met her. Ask her that one, and watch her not answer. How long? 9 weeks. I said nothing. There it is, Lydia said, and something in her got bigger. You've done the arithmetic. You always do the arithmetic. She was in that house 9 weeks after my mother's funeral, and she was signing platform paper inside a year. And everybody in this city calls it a love story because she started again. Because of what she looks like when she walks into a room. You've had 9 years to find one thing on her, I said. 1. Not a story about a timeline, an actual thing, and you've got a board, a title, and a legal department, and you've come to a kitchen to tell me about 9 weeks. I have a statement, Lydia said. That's the thing I have. She stood up. When they take you, and they will take you, she'll be at the front of the courtroom looking devastating in navy, and she'll be running that company on Monday, and you'll be in a room you can't leave, counting whatever it is you count. She picked up her phone. I did love you. That's the part nobody believes. I loved you right up until I understood that the only thing you were ever going to be in my family was useful. She left the door open behind her. I sat in that kitchen for about 20 minutes, and then I did the thing I'm ashamed of, which is that I looked it up. 9 weeks was wrong. It was 14 months, and the funeral Lydia was counting from was a memorial service her father held on the anniversary. And I found that out in 4 minutes with an obituary and an archived events page. And I still spent those 4 minutes doing it. I never told Dana. That's the loose thread I'd take back if I were allowed one. The envelope came to Ren's mother's building on the 34th day. No note. 2 photographs. Ren's mother at the bus stop on Delaney with her shopping trolley, and the second one taken from inside the lobby, through the glass, of the mailboxes with 4F circled in pen. Ren called the house at 6:20 in the morning, and she was doing the thing where you keep your voice completely level and it's worse than screaming. It's fine. It's a scare tactic. I'm not stopping. Ren. I said I'm not stopping. Don't do the speech. I've got the 3rd fix, by the way. There's a commit in the cold archive from 4 years ago that changes one constant, the batch size. Someone raised the throughput ceiling on a job that was supposed to be dead. Raised it to what? To something a lot bigger than 41 million, she said. Kai, this thing could push the whole clearing float. I told her to stay where she was and hung up, and Dana was already standing in the study doorway in a coat at 6:24 in the morning, holding a phone with somebody on it. 2 cars at the mother's address in 9 minutes. She goes to the Weatherly, my account indefinitely, and there's a woman named Cass on my detail I want on her personally. Pause. Yes, personally. Yes, tonight. She hung up. Thank you, I said. Don't. She was already scrolling for the next number. I'm not doing it for her. You've never met her. That's right. Dana looked up. I'm doing it because a man put photographs of an old woman's mailbox in an envelope to make you stop, and I want him to understand that everything he does from here makes me larger. Ren moved into the Weatherly that night. Her mother thought she'd won a competition. There is a version of this story where that's the last we hear of it, but the woman kept sending me messages about the hotel breakfast for the next 3 weeks, and I want that on the record. Because she was 23, and she never once asked to be let out of it, the batch size constant was the whole thing. Here is what I understood at 4 in the morning on the 35th day, with 3 windows open and Dana asleep sideways in the study armchair with her shoes still on. The 214 transfers were never the crime. They were a rehearsal, run through my key so that if anybody looked afterward, they'd find me, and 41 million came back in 9 hours because it was never meant to leave. What they were measuring was throughput. How much a dead reconciliation job could push through the settlement gateway before anything noticed. The answer was nearly everything, once. If you did it on the one day of the year when huge numbers moving through that gateway don't look like anything at all, Crane Capital's margin call. The bond issue Dana had been on the phone about for a month settles on the 40th day. Every counterparty in the platform moves at once. 14 billion goes through that gateway in a 4-hour window. And the exception queue is so loud that morning that nobody hand checks anything. Anyone who owns the clearing gateway for 4 hours on that day doesn't steal money. They don't need to. They record themselves as the operator of record, and the license follows the operator, and a license that Edward Crane refused to sell for any number simply changes hands in daylight with paperwork. Day 40. Which is also, and I remember laughing out loud in an empty study like a lunatic, the day of my hearing. Every single person who might notice, Dana, her counsel, Orthvale's compliance chief, me, would be sitting in a courtroom on Marchand Street with our phones in a plastic tray. I woke her up. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, sitting forward with her elbows on her knees. And when I finished, she got up and went to the desk and opened the bottom drawer and took out a folder that had a house deed on top of it. Then you should read this, she said. It was the hospital summary. Holloway Medical, 3 years ago. Edward Crane, 61. Cardiac arrest at 4:50. Second page, a medication administration record. One entry at 3:58 in the morning and a login code in the operator column. And the login code did not belong to a nurse because the hospital's letter 3 pages later said the account had been created for a systems vendor and closed the following week. Whose vendor, they wouldn't say. Counsel asked twice. Dana sat down on the arm of the chair. 3 days before that, Edward told a fund called Peller Group that the clearing license wasn't for sale. They'd offered 800 million. He told them the number wasn't the problem. The platform was the problem, and that he'd rather burn it. Peller Group. I'd typed the words 100 times without ever once looking at them, because Peller's a counterparty on half the flow in that city, and their name goes past you like furniture. They didn't want to buy it, I said. No, they wanted the operator seat. Yes. She was very still. And they've been in this house since before he died, 5 days. The thing that broke me wasn't Gabe or Pellar or a login code at 3:58 in the morning. It was a bank statement. Day 36. I was after something else entirely, the escrow reference on my bail, because I wanted to build the repayment schedule properly and I needed the account it would go back to. 12 years of transfers deserve a correct destination field. That's the level I was operating at. There was no account. I called the bond company. I gave them the case number and my name and got a woman named Hargreaves who was so kind about it that I understood before she'd finished her second sentence. The bail hadn't been paid in cash. It had been collateralized, and the collateral wasn't a house or a share block or any of the 400 things that woman owns. It was the clearing key. She'd pledged Edward's fob against a credit line at Vessel Mutual on the Saturday, and the terms sat in front of me in a PDF while a kind woman on the phone asked if I was still there. If the line got called, the key went to a custodian. A custodian holds it. A custodian is a third party. A third party with a clearing key is exactly the thing her husband had died refusing to allow. She'd known that. She'd known it on the Saturday. She'd put the single object standing between Peller Group and a license on a table, in an office, for a man in an anklet she'd said 40 words to in 2 years. And then she'd come to a holding room and told me to sign the second sheet first because the bail clerk left at 7. He came down the stairs with the phone still in his hand, and she knew from the sound of him on the third step. She had rehearsed this. Not the words, the shape. He'd find out in 3 weeks, or he'd find out at the hearing. And either way, there'd be a version where he decided what she'd done was a purchase. What she had not rehearsed was doing the bond issue at the same time. 2 banks on hold, an investor call at 4, and a man in her hallway holding a PDF. She thought, say it plainly. Say I did it because if you sat in a cell for 4 months, you would come out as somebody else. And I have watched exactly one person get taken apart by a room they couldn't leave. And I was not going to do it twice, she said. Are you eating tonight or not? You pledged the key. I'm on with Osaka. You pledged the key for me. 2 days after I got arrested, she put her hand over the phone. This is a 9-figure conversation, and it's got 11 minutes left in it. Answer the question. There wasn't a question in that, and I said it. I'm not going to soften it. People ask me about the hearing, about Gabe, about the gateway, and I tell them all of it. But this is the part I'd take back. And I've had a long time to work out why, and it's this. I knew exactly which sentence would go through her, and I picked it on purpose. And the reason I picked it is that I was 26 years old and terrified of being owned by somebody who was kind to me. Your husband bought a license, and you bought a husband, I said. That's the family business, isn't it? You saw a cheap asset in a holding room with a monitor on his leg, and you put a bid in before anyone else got there. Well, congratulations. You got me at the bottom. Take the anklet off me, and take yourself off me too. The phone was still in her hand. Osaka was still on it. She looked at me for about 4 seconds, and her face did nothing at all. That was the horror of it. She has a face that's been in rooms with men like Perrin since she was 24, and it does nothing on command. Then she lifted the phone back to her ear, said, "Sorry, say the coupon again," and walked out of the hall and down the corridor into the study and finished the call. She was on it for 9 more minutes. She got the coupon down 11 basis points. I know that because Alvarez emailed her about it 2 days later, and I read the email. Then she went upstairs, and she didn't come back down. She was gone for 2 days. Not a slammed door, not a bag in the hall, she just wasn't there. Her car went at 6 the first morning and came back at midnight and went again at 6. Somebody left food in the fridge in labeled containers, sealed, factory seals, and it took me until the second day to notice that everything in there was something you can eat without trusting a human being. Dwight came Thursday and did the tether check and looked around the kitchen. Where's herself? Working. Said Dwight, in a way that contained an entire lecture and delivered none of it, and descaled the machine again out of what I can only describe as spite. Here's what I had, on the 38th day, standing in a house in Faro Hill. I had exactly what I'd been asking for since the first night. Nobody watching me, nobody at the top of the stairs. No hand on mine, no pot on the table, no woman putting her forehead on my shoulder under a tree and calling it inconvenient. 30 meters of gravel, 14 doors in a garage, and quiet. And I sat in that quiet for 2 days and understood, with the specific flatness you get when you're not allowed to dramatize it, that I had spent 9 years in a building at Marlow asking to be left alone. And I had finally managed it, and it was the same. The exact same air, same hour, same size of room. I'd gotten it. It was on the menu the whole time, and I'd ordered it, and here it was. Peace, it turns out, is just Marlow with better appliances. I got up off the floor and went and found my one-collared shirt. Vessel Street, Friday, 39th day, 9:15 in the morning. You should know I had no legal right to be there. I had a variance for court appearances and medical appointments, and what I had instead was Dwight Moss eating a bacon roll in a car on the corner saying, 90 minutes. And if anybody asks, you were at the clinic. You'll lose your job. I've been at this 11 years and I've never once had a file this interesting, said Dwight. Go on. Perrin had the 9th floor. I went up with a visitor badge that said guest in enormous letters, walked into a meeting he was already running, and shut the door behind me. You can't. Sit down, Mr. Perrin. He sat down. I've thought about why, and I think it's because I'd stopped asking for things 3 days earlier and it shows on a person. There are 4 things happening on Monday, I said. 1 is my hearing. 2 is the bond settlement. 3 is $14 billion going through a gateway that a fund called Peller Group has been building an operator claim against since before Edward Crane died. And 4 is you on this floor, holding a co-CEO title you got with a badge reader standing next to it when it happens. I don't know what. I know you don't. That's the only reason you're not in the same sentence as the rest of them. I put a single sheet on the table. That's the throughput constant on a batch job at Orthvale. It was raised 4 years ago. That's a document about somebody else's company, so you can't act on it, but you can read it, and I'd like you to read it before I say the next part. He read it. He's not a smart man, but he's a frightened one, which is faster. The next part, I said, is that on Monday morning, Dana Crane's badge is going to work. That's a board matter. On Monday morning, her badge is going to work, and her signature authority is going to be restored, and the evaluation is going to be withdrawn, Because on Tuesday, one of two things is true. Either the license moved on your watch while the CEO was locked out of the building on a piece of paper you signed, or she was in that room, and you're the man who put her there. Perrin's ears went the color of the ham in Dwight's roll. Why would you do this, he said. You want the seat. Take the seat. I don't want the seat. Then what do you want? Her badge, I said. That's the whole list. He restored it at 11:40. I know because I watched the internal notice land on a phone in a car on the corner, while Dwight explained to me at length how to store coffee beans. Then I did the second thing, which I'm less proud of and would do again. I rang the head of her security detail, a man named Ostroff, who has never liked me, and told him I wanted the full roster, the vehicle rotation, and the route sheets. Those go to Mrs. Crane. I'm aware. I want a copy. On whose authority? On the authority of a man who is going to sit in a courtroom on Monday with his phone in a tray, while somebody who's already killed one person in this family has 4 hours where nobody's counting. I let that sit. Bill it to me? I've got a spreadsheet. He sent it in 20 minutes. I put my own detection on her phone, a small, ugly thing I wrote in an afternoon that does nothing except watch for the shape of a device being cloned, because that's how you get a person's calendar. I moved 2 cars in her rotation. I called the Weatherly and had Cass reassigned back to Dana and a different woman put on Ren. And then I called Ren and told her and she said rude and hung up on me, which is how I knew she was fine. Dana came home at 9 that night. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the internal notice open on her phone and her card in her other hand, and she'd clearly been holding both of them in the car for a while. Perrin folded. Yes, you went to Vessel Street. I did. You were under house arrest, she said, and you got in a car, and you went to my building, and you leaned on a 60-year-old man in front of his own staff for a badge. Yes. You wouldn't take 6%. I still don't want 6%. I put the roster down on the island between us, face up, because I wasn't going to do it the sneaky way. Ostroff sent that to me at 4 this afternoon. I moved 2 of your cars. I've got a thing on your phone that watches for a clone, and it stays there until Tuesday. And if you want it off, you can take it off, and I'll put it back on. She looked at the roster. That's my detail. That's your detail. You're telling me you're doing this. I'm telling you I've done it, I said. And I'm not going to stand here and call it protecting you, because it isn't only that. I've watched you not ask me a single question for 39 days. And I said the worst thing I have ever said to another human being to you in a hallway. And you got a coupon down 11 points and came back with dinner in sealed containers. My voice went somewhere I don't like. So no, I'm not letting go of this. Of you. Whatever it's called when a man with an ankle monitor reorganizes a security detail, that. I'm doing that. Dana put her card down on top of the roster, very precisely, like she was closing a file. Say the last part again. I'm not letting go. Slower. You're enjoying this. I've had a difficult week, she said, and crossed the kitchen. I'd like to record that we did not sleep that night either, and that at some point around 2 in the morning, she said, into my shoulder, 34. And I said, yes, I can count. And she hit me, and I have never been happier in my life than in that specific badly lit kitchen with 14 doors in the garage. At 6:05 the next morning, the gate camera picked up a car on the gravel. Gabe got out of it. No coat. He'd been driving a while. He didn't come in. He stood at the door with his hands in his pockets and looked at the pear tree and said, you found the constant. Ren found the constant. He nodded slowly. That'll be the girl at the Weatherly. I stood very still. Yeah, Gabe said. That's what I came to say. I know where she is. I know where her mother is. I know the room number, and I know the woman you put on her, and I want you to understand that knowing it is the whole message, and I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't do that part. Who does? People I've been working for since about a year before you finished your certification. He said it like a man reading a receipt. You want to hear it? You look like you want to hear it. I want to hear it. Then get it right, because you'll only get one version. He turned around and leaned on the porch rail. I read a file in 2011 about a kid in Halloway with rope burns. That was true. I drove 4 hours. That was true. I paid for your courses. I co-signed your lease. I put you in that building, and every Sunday for 9 years I fed you at my sister's table. All true. And the reason a man builds a thing like that, Gabe said, is so that one day when a lot of money needs a face, there's a face already sitting in the right chair with the right access and no family to make noise about it. There it is. 9 years, I said. 9 years is nothing. You hold an asset. That's the job. He looked at me. I fixed 2 lines of your code over pasta and you remember it, right? Because it was the best night of that whole year for you. I remember it because I had already decided by then. That's the difference between us, and it always was. I asked him about Edward Crane. He looked at the tree. I wasn't in the building, he said. I made the account. Somebody else used it. Say his name. No. Gabe pushed off the rail. You're going to go to a courtroom on Monday and take 4 years, or you're going to be clever and take 11. That's all that's on the menu, kid. Nobody's going to believe a fraud analyst with a monitor on his leg about a fund with 900 lawyers. He started down the steps. Eat something. You look terrible. At the bottom, he stopped and said without turning round, For what it's worth. I didn't think you'd get this far. For what it's worth, I said, you're 41 minutes into a recording. He didn't turn round then either. He stood there on the gravel with his back to me for about 3 seconds, and then he got in the car and drove away. And I sat down on the porch step with a phone in my hand and shook for a while. Dana came out and sat on the step below me, which put her looking up, the way she had on the first night, and she took my hand palm fingers, the flat of it, and said, How much of it did you get? All of it. From the gate camera onward. Audio's clean. Good, said Dana Crane, and her voice had something in it I'd only heard once. On a phone at 6:24 in the morning. Then let's ruin them properly. We had 2 days, and we spent the first 4 hours of them arguing about the same thing from opposite ends. Dana wanted to freeze the gateway. She had the key. 72 hours, one push, nothing settles, nothing moves, and Peller's whole play evaporates because there's no operator's seat if there's no operation. And on Wednesday it's still true, I said. Every counterparty on the platform eats a failed settlement. Crane Capital gets sued by 9 institutions. The regulator opens a file on you, and Peller sits in a room somewhere reading about it and waits for the next margin call. There's one every quarter. So we let them do it. We let them start. She hated it. She said so with her whole face, which by then I'd learned to read the way you learn a dialect. They walk into the gateway, I said. They put their hands on it. They record themselves as operator of record, in daylight, with paperwork, exactly like they planned, and every second of that is them, not me, not a 9-year-old service account, not a kid's coursework. Then we shut the door. With what? With a regulator in the room and a phone in your hand. There's a version of this where I'm being clever. I want to be honest. I was being clever, and I was also gambling with $14 billion of other people's money. And if a single thing had gone sideways on Monday, I would currently be a cautionary tale in a compliance training video. Sunday, 7:40 in the morning, Vessel Street. Her card worked. She went through the turnstile the same way she goes through every door, like it was never in question. And the guard, Marcus, who'd said her name in that voice 3 weeks earlier, stood up so fast his chair went into the wall. She stopped. You were doing your job, she said. Don't do that again. No, ma'am. Do it again if I'm the one who's wrong. Then the 9th floor, where 6 people were in on a Sunday because Perrin had called them in, and every single one of them stood up, and she said, Sit down, we're going to be here a while, and put her coat over the back of the chair at the head of the table. I watched it from the lobby on a laptop, 30 meters from a base unit 40 minutes away, with Dwight beside me on the sofa eating something from a bag. That's a woman who's about to go through somebody, he said approvingly. At 11 that morning, we ran the trap. 3 weeks earlier, I'd done a small piece of housekeeping that nobody had asked me about. Dana carries the clearing key in her coat pocket, and I'd made a copy of the housing the same brushed shell, the same worn plastic loop around a chip that does exactly one thing. It phones home when it's touched. The real one had spent 19 days in the glove box of a probation officer's Vauxhall under a bag of coffee beans. Because Dwight Moss is the only man in this story, nobody ever suspected of anything. So on Sunday, when the credit line at Vessel Mutual was called 11 days early by a lender who suddenly had concerns, a lender whose facility had been syndicated in March to 2 vehicles that both filed to the same address in Delaware, the collateral moved to a custodian on schedule. A custodian took possession of a $400 prop at 11:04 in the morning. At 11:09, it woke up in a building on Halden Street, 4 floors above the registry room where a man had once put cuffs on me and started reporting its position every 90 seconds like an obedient dog. Dana watched the dot appear on my laptop. That's Peller's counsel, she said. That's their floor. That's their floor. They called the line early, she sat back. They wanted the key in a custodian's hands before Monday so that when the operator seat changed, the key would already be somewhere they could reach. Yes, they planned that in March. They planned it 3 years ago, I said. March is just when the paperwork caught up. Monday, day 40. The hearing was at 10 on Marchand Street, and the settlement window opened at 8, and I had spent the night working out how to be in 2 places, and the answer, humiliatingly, was that I couldn't be and didn't need to be. Here's how it went. In order, because I've told it out of order before, and people get lost. 0750. Dana in the operations room on the 4th floor at Vessel Street with the head of platform ops, a deputy from the regulator's market infrastructure unit named Adeyemi, who had been given 90 minutes of my analysis at 6 on Sunday evening and had not slept since, and 2 people from Orthvale's compliance office who had spent the weekend finding out what a 9-year-old service account can do. 0800, settlement opens. 14 billion begins moving through the gateway. The exception queue starts screaming the way it does every quarter, and nobody looks at it the way they do every quarter. 0841. SVZ Recon 02 authenticates. 0841-15. The batch job fires 4 minutes past the hour is a lie. It fires on a schedule I'd read in a file, and I had the time to the second, and Adiemi's people were watching the socket when it opened. 0852. A filing is submitted electronically to the platform's registrar, naming Peller Group Holdings as operator of record for the settlement gateway, supported by a technical attestation that the incumbent operator's controls had failed during the window, signed by a compliance officer at Orthvale Bank, named in a document I'd never seen before that morning. They didn't steal a dollar. I want that understood. Not $1 moved to anyone who shouldn't have had it. They walked in, put their name on the operating seat while the machine was loud, and got a license worth $800 million for the price of a legal filing. 0853. Dana Crane pushed the key. Not the prop. The real one, out of a bag of coffee beans in her hand, in a room with a regulator standing beside her. Settlement stopped across the platform for 72 hours, at 0853 on the busiest morning of the quarter, and the only human being on Earth who could do that was standing in her own building with her badge working. 14 minutes of chaos. Every counterparty phone in the city went off at once. 2 banks' heads of ops were physically in the lobby within the hour. And the filing, the beautiful filing, the daylight robbery, the thing 3 years in the making, sat in the registrar's queue, attesting that Peller Group had assumed operation of a gateway that had been frozen 420 seconds earlier by its actual owner. You cannot become the operator of record of a thing that is not operating. It'd have been fine if they'd been slower. That's the part I still enjoy. They'd have been fine if they'd waited for the queue to fill up properly. But they went at 8:52 because they knew that at 10 o'clock, the one person who could read the pattern would be sitting in a courtroom with his phone in a plastic tray. They rushed because of me. 0915. Lydia Crane arrived at Vessel Street to run the settlement floor, because that's the CFO's job on a settlement morning, and found the 4th floor full of people from the regulator and her stepmother at the head of the table with a phone in her hand. I wasn't there. I have this from 4 separate people and they all tell it the same way, which is unusual, she said. What is this? Adiemi asked her, mildly, whether she was the officer who had approved the technical attestation for the registrar filing. Lydia said the attestation was a matter for Orthvale. Adiemi said he hadn't mentioned which filing. That's it. That's the whole thing. 9 words and a folder she never got to open. And a woman who has run on the same fuel her entire life being the person in the room, who knows one thing more than everybody else. Put out by a man asking a boring question at 9:15 in the morning. Dana didn't say a word to her. That's what everybody who was there remembers, and it's the thing I'd have paid money to see. Her stepdaughter stood in front of her for 11 seconds waiting to be spoken to, in front of a regulator and half a trading floor, and Dana looked at her the way you look at a chair that's in the wrong place, and then turned back to the screen. 10 o'clock. Marchand Street, Courtroom 3. I had Dwight in the 2nd row, Ren Okada in the 3rd with her mother beside her, because the woman had insisted on coming and had brought sandwiches, and a defense lawyer named Priya Raval who had been on the case 11 days and had spent 9 of them telling me my plan was insane. The prosecutor's name was Whitaker. Gray suit, good voice, and a case that had been fed to him in a very convenient shape by people who had every reason to want it closed fast. He opened with the key, the timestamps, and Lydia's statement. Priya asked for a brief recess at 10:31 to submit late evidence, and Whitaker objected, and the judge, Aurelio, 68, famously allergic to theater, asked what the evidence was. Priya said, "A recording of the state's principal witness's handler describing the framing of the defendant, Your Honor, made 2 days ago, 41 minutes in length, and a preliminary finding from the Market Infrastructure Unit of the regulator, timestamped this morning at 9:40. Whitaker went the color of his own paperwork. They played 11 minutes of it. Not the whole thing. 11 minutes, in a room with 30 people in it, and everybody heard a man's voice. Warm, reasonable, the voice that had told a 17-year-old to stand up straight, say, "You hold an asset. That's the job." And then, "I fixed 2 lines of your code over pasta and you remember it, right? Because it was the best night of that whole year for you." Ren's mother said something in Japanese that Ren refused to translate. At 11:20, the judge suspended proceedings pending referral, ordered the ankle monitor removed within 24 hours, and asked Whitaker, in a voice like a man closing a drawer, whether the state had troubled to interview any Orthvale Systems personnel before charging a systems architect. Whitaker said the investigation had been assisted by the institution. Assisted, Judge Aurelio repeated and wrote something down. They took Gabe in the corridor outside courtroom 3 at 11:34. He'd come. That's the thing. Nobody made him, he had no subpoena. He wasn't a witness, and he sat at the back for an hour and a half listening to his own voice on a speaker, and he could have left at any point in it. 2 officers and a woman from the referral unit, and they did it quietly, no shouting, in a corridor with a vending machine in it. I was 6 feet away. He looked at me while they were doing the thing with his hands, and he said, "Kai, I have thought about what I felt, standing there. People want it to be something. They want the moment where it hurts, or where I forgive him, or where I say something that goes on a poster. I felt like a man watching a stranger's arrest at a train station. That's all. 9 years of Sunday dinners and a car park in Holloway, and 2 lines fixed over cold pasta. And I stood in a corridor with a vending machine and felt approximately nothing. I have never been able to decide whether that's what he took from me or what he gave me. I did say one thing because he was still looking at me. They rushed at 08:52, I said. Because of me. Tell them that. Tell them the kid was the asset right up to the end. The rest took 8 days, and the trade press wrote it up as a fund collapse, which is the boring way to say it. Peller groups filing to the registrar became the single best piece of evidence anybody could have handed a regulator, because it was signed, dated, and attested to conditions that provably did not exist. Their operator claim was struck on the Wednesday. The clearing license stayed with the platform. Their facility banks, the 2 Delaware vehicles that had called Dana's credit line 11 days early, got asked by Adeyemi's unit, in writing, to explain the timing. And neither of them managed a good answer. And one of them stopped answering at all. 2 partners were charged. The compliance officer at Orthvale, who signed the attestation, was charged within the month. Gabe Hartley was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and this took 5 more months and a hospital's records unit that finally stopped hiding behind counsel with matters arising from the death of Edward Crane, which is a phrase lawyers use so they can sleep. Lydia Crane was removed from the board of Crane Capital on the Thursday by a vote she was present for. Perrin voted to remove her at length, using the word prudent 4 times, and I hope he enjoyed it because it was the last vote he ever cast on that board. She went in September, and he went in November. And Alvarez, who had read an empty folder for 6 minutes on my first day in that building, resigned by email. Her shares went into the restitution order. 11 of the 214 transfers carried her authorization inside the second factor, which she'd approved from her own phone at 03:34 in the morning in April. Because Peller's people had needed a second signature, and she'd been happy to give it to the man who was going to take the fall on Friday. She came to the house once, in October, and stood on the gravel and asked to speak to me. I was at the kitchen island with a laptop. Dana was on a call. I looked out of the window at her for a while, and then I went back to the thing I was doing. And she stood out there for about 6 minutes, and then she left. I want to say I was above it. I wasn't above it. I let her stand there, and I enjoyed it. And if you'd like to think less of me for that, I understand. The anklet came off on the Tuesday at 9:20 in the morning, in the kitchen, by a man eating a bacon roll. Dwight had brought the roll and a second one wrapped in foil for me, and a special tool. And he took his time about it because he is a professional. Right, he said. Sit down, foot up on the chair. This is the good part of my job. I get about 4 of these a year, and 2 of them are people I want to punch. The strap had left a band around my ankle. Pale skin, a groove, and a patch where the plastic had worn a raw line under the ankle bone that I'd stopped noticing in about week 2. He unclipped it, put it in the case, and closed the case. 30 meters is over, Dwight said. Go anywhere you like. Go to Portugal. I stood up and went out of the front door and down the gravel to the paint mark I'd made, and I stopped at it. Obviously, I stopped at it. 40 days of stopping at a mark does something to a person's legs. Dwight stood on the porch and shouted, "It's off, you lunatic!" And I took 4 more steps and stood under the pear tree. And that was that. He got a commendation about 11 months later for the tether window filing, which he'd made 11 times over 4 years and which nobody had read until a judge in a referral hearing asked why a monitored defendant's position report had a 40-minute gap in it once a month. I have never confirmed a single thing about that morning, and I never will. I did not want money. I have said this to a lot of people, and I've watched their faces do the thing where they decide I'm lying or I'm an idiot. And honestly, either one is fine, but I want to lay out how it arrived, because I did not go and get it, and there is no version of the story where I go and get it. It came in 3 pieces. The first piece was the restitution order in February. Lydia's shares had gone into it in November, and there were 2 injured parties on the schedule, Crane Capital, for a scheme run through its officers, and me, for 9 years of a service account opened in my name adjacent month, a fraudulent charge, 40 days of house arrest, and a statement given to a detective at 4:15 on a Friday afternoon by a woman in a cream sweater. Priya Raval called me to tell me the number, and I made her say it twice. 4.1% of Crane capital. The share block that Lydia Crane had spent 9 years defending from a stepmother she considered a thief transferred, by order of a court, to the man she left standing in a registry room with a pen in his hand. I asked Priya whether I could decline it. There was a pause on the line of the kind you get when a lawyer is deciding how to phrase something. You can, she said. It would go back to the estate of the party that harmed you, and the effect would be that your ex-fiance's family retains the asset. Is that what you want? No. Then shut up and sign it, said Priya, who bills $600 an hour and gives excellent value. The second piece was uglier and took longer. The reconciliation batch handler, 300 lines, written by a 19-year-old for a certification module, cleaned up by a man over pasta, had been filed as part of a patent for an automated exception handling process in 2017. Filed by G. Hartley, assigned to a consultancy he owned, and licensed to 4 institutions in this country and 2 abroad. 9 years of licensing revenue on a thing I wrote for coursework. The consultancy dissolved during the proceedings, which is the sort of thing that happens, and the assignment was voided. And then 2 very tired people from an IP firm spent 4 months establishing authorship using a laptop backup from 2016 and an email I'd sent to Gabe on a Tuesday in which I said, and I quote myself as a 19-year-old, "It's ugly, but it works, lol." 4 banks paid retroactively, and one of them argued for a year first. The third piece was the one nobody predicted, and it was Ren's fault. She'd written it up. Not the case, the method. The 3 signatures, the scuff, the rhythm work, the whole framework of reading a fraud by the habits of the person who built it rather than by the numbers, and she'd put my name on it first and hers second, and submitted it to a conference in Lisbon while I was still under house arrest and hadn't told me. It went round the industry like a cold. By the following spring, there were 2 banks and a clearinghouse asking me to come and do it to them on purpose. And I said yes to the third one because they offered the smallest amount of money and the most interesting mess. That's the business now. 11 people. Ren runs the technical side and refuses to be called anything except the adult. We don't take clients whose flow goes through the platform because I'm married to it, and I'd like that recorded somewhere a compliance officer can find it. The number itself came out on a Sunday in June, off a screen in the kitchen, read out loud by Dwight Moss, who had come to fix the machine he'd decided was his and stayed for lunch. He was scrolling on his phone. Here we go, business section. He held it up. Rendell, whose stake and settlement holdings are estimated at. Hold on, that can't be right. It's not right, I said. It says here. It's not right, they've counted the block twice. The restitution and the shareholding are the same asset. It says $241 million. Dana didn't look up from the paper. It's about 190. About, said Dwight. After the disposals, about. Dwight put his phone face down on the island, laced his fingers, and looked at me over them with enormous patience. You made me buy the coffee beans? You offered. I have been buying the coffee beans for this house for 14 months. You said, and I want to be accurate, that you didn't trust our selection. I didn't, said Dwight. I still don't. But I want it on the record that I have been personally subsidizing a man with $190 million, and I'd like an apology, and I'd like it in cash. Dana laughed so hard she had to put the paper down. That's how I found out what I'm worth. Sitting at an island in a kitchen while a probation officer with 11 years of service demanded reparations over espresso beans, and I've never had a better version of that moment available to me, and I wouldn't take one now. I went back to Marlow in March. It's a distribution warehouse. There's a fence and a car park and a sign for a logistics company with a cheerful font, and the building itself came down in 2014, and there's nothing there at all. I stood in the car park for 11 minutes and felt like an idiot and drove home. Pratt was in a care facility outside Halloway. I found that out inside an hour, because finding people is genuinely all I do. I did not go. Everybody expects the scene. There's always a version of this story where the man goes and stands at the foot of the bed and says something. And I understand why people want it, and here's the truth. I sat in a car with the address in my phone for 2 hours in April. And then I drove to a garden center and bought a pear tree for the north side of the house, which is a thing I did instead of the other thing. And I'm aware of what that is. What I did do was send Priya the file, and Priya sent it to somebody who does that work. And there are now 9 other names attached to a claim about a corridor in a building that doesn't exist. 3 of those people I've met. One of them, a man called Errol, who is 44 and drives a forklift in Bradbury, remembers a night woman with a scuff on her turn. He said, "You counted the tiles," I said. "Everybody counted the tiles." He said, "No, mate," I sang. The second device, the one from the study shelf, with the dust in the seam and the 3-year-old manufacture code, was never traced to a person, and I want to be honest with you about that, because I've told this story in rooms where people expect every thread to be pulled. It was consistent with a batch bought by a security firm that Peller used and stopped using. The firm's records for that year were incomplete. The referral unit noted it and moved on because they had a filing signed by a compliance officer and 11 minutes of Gabe Hartley's voice, and they did not need a smoke detector. Dana had the study repainted anyway, not for the device. She said the shelf annoyed her. I check ceilings now in every room I sit down in about 4 seconds before I take my coat off. Ren thinks it's funny. I've stopped pretending it's a professional habit. The board thing took until September, and it was the last real fight. Dana had come back as CEO by the badge and by force of the regulator's timeline, but acting jointly with the CFO was still on paper, and the CFO was gone. And Perrin was still sitting there in the position of a man who had signed a capacity evaluation against a woman who then saved the platform in front of the entire market. He wanted a graceful exit, a statement about a mutual review, something with the word prudent in it. I had 4.1% by then and had never voted it. And Dana had made a point of never asking me to. She came into the study on the Sunday before and stood in the doorway that had no door and said, "September's Thursday. You don't have to be there. Do you want me there? I want your shares there." Those are 2 different sentences, and I'm only asking the first one. I went. I sat at the far end of a table on the 19th floor of a building on Vessel Street, in a chair I'd been standing behind at Christmas parties for 2 years, and when it came round I said 4.1. In favor of the resolution and against the second item. And Perrin looked at me like a man who'd found the bill under his plate. The resolution restored her as sole chief executive with a vote of confidence attached. The second item was a proposal to appoint me to the board, which somebody had put on the agenda without asking me, and which I voted against with my own shares, which I'm told is unusual. Perrin resigned in November, and the trade press said he'd chosen to step back to focus on other interests. His other interests were a golf handicap of 9 and a boat. Here's the part I didn't see coming, and I'd built a career on seeing things coming. She got worse after we won. Not loud. Dana Crane does not do anything loud. But the detail rotation stopped changing because she stopped letting Ostroff move me between cars. My calendar synced to hers in October, and when I asked about it, she said the assistant did it, and the assistant looked at the floor. She came to Lisbon when Ren presented the paper, sat at the back of a room full of fraud analysts for 90 minutes, and did not enjoy 1 second of it. And afterwards, in a hotel bar, she watched a 28-year-old from a Dutch bank ask me a question about batch windows and said, into her glass, "He's been standing there 4 minutes. He's asking about batch windows. He's been standing there 4 minutes. The first time I called it what it was, we were in the car. You know that this is jealousy? It's scheduling. It's jealousy, and it's fine, and you can say the word. I don't like the word. You pledged a clearing key for a man you'd said 40 words to, I said. I don't think the word is your biggest problem. She drove for a bit. When you were on the stairs, she said, on the first night, counting. I stood in the corridor for 11 minutes before I came up, because I was working out whether you'd let me touch you and what I would do for the rest of my life if you didn't. That's the closest that woman has ever come to naming a feeling out loud, and she did it at 60 miles an hour looking at a motorway. And then she changed lanes and asked me about dinner. In November, she came home at 10 and sat down on the end of the bed with her coat still on and said, "I'd like to know your plan." For what? For the flat nobody's heard of. I'd set it in a kitchen in April. She'd carried it around for 7 months like a stone in a shoe. "Because you can go now," she said to the window. "You could go in March. You could go tonight. There's no anklet. There's no bail. There's no case. You've got your own money and a company and a name that people call about. And you've never once said anything about after. You've never asked. I don't ask questions I don't want answered. I thought we'd established that. I want to describe what she looked like sitting there, and I can't do it without wrecking it. So, she still had her coat on. That's the detail. 35 years old, sole chief executive, $4.6 billion, and she came into a bedroom and sat on the corner of the bed with her coat on because taking it off would have looked like she was staying. "There's no flat," I said. "There's a flat. You've had a printout of it in the study since August." "I've had a printout of a 2-bedroom in Ilder Row since August, because I wanted to see if I still wanted it," I said. "And I look at it about once a month, the way you look at that drawer with the deed in it. And the answer's been no since about the 2nd week of June." "Then why do you keep it?" "Because I like knowing the door isn't locked from the outside." She was quiet. "That's not a very romantic reason." "No," I said. "It's the only one I've got, and it's the biggest thing I own." She took the coat off. Gabe pleaded out in the spring, 11 months after the corridor. 22 years, and the sentence on the Holloway matter runs after the fraud, which means the number is theoretical, and everybody in that courtroom knew it. His sister sold the house with the kitchen where I ate 200 Sunday dinners. She sent me a letter once, and I did not read past the first line. And I did not throw it away either, and it is in a box in a study with a repainted shelf. I did not attend the sentencing. Ren went. She said he looked smaller, which is what everybody always says, and which I think is a thing people need to be true. He wrote to me twice. The first letter was 4 pages, and I stopped at the bottom of the second, where he explained that a man in his position had made a series of practical decisions, and that I, of all people, should understand a system. The second was 1 line, and I've read it more times than I'd like. Did you ever eat anything I gave you? I never answered. There's your loose end. I've had 5 years to write 2 words on a card, and I haven't done it, and I don't have a good explanation. And every so often, at about 2 in the morning, I take it out of the box and read it again like a man checking a lock he already knows is closed. The last thing, before the quiet part. In April, a year on, I got a call from a woman at a bank in Lisbon, one of the 2 abroad, the ones that had licensed a patent built out of a 19-year-old's homework. She wanted to talk about an exception queue. Standard work. We do about 9 of those a year. Somewhere in the 3rd call, she mentioned, in passing, that their platform had a settlement gateway coming up for an operator review, and that a bidder had appeared out of a holding structure she couldn't get behind, and that the technical attestation supporting the bid had been prepared very efficiently by somebody who clearly knew the process. Very efficiently. I asked her to send me the filing. It came in on a Thursday, 4 pages, clean, correct, and boring, and I read it 3 times before I found it. And when I found it, I sat back in a chair in a study in Faro Hill and laughed the way you laugh in an empty room. Every timestamp in the supporting log was 4 minutes past the hour. I sat on it for 9 days. That's the part that would have been impossible a year earlier. 9 days with a filing in a drawer and a bank in Lisbon waiting on an invoice. And I ate 3 meals a day and slept most nights and did not once open a laptop at 4 in the morning. On the 10th day, I put the 4 pages on the kitchen island and told her. Dana read them the way she reads everything, at the speed of a menu, and then went back to page 3 and read that one properly. 4 minutes passed. Every entry. It's a copy, she said. Somebody bought the method. It went round the industry like a cold, your words? It might be. It might not be. She squared the pages. What do you want to do? And this is the answer I gave, and I've had 5 years to be embarrassed about it, and I'm not. I want to have dinner, I said. I want to have dinner, and then tomorrow I want to call Adeyemi's counterpart in Portugal, whose name I don't know yet, and give him a boring 4-page document and let him do his job. And then I'd like to not think about a settlement gateway until Monday. She looked at me for a second. Who are you and what have you done with the man who took a door apart with a screwdriver? He's still here. He just eats now. I went to see the flat in Ilder Row in May. The agent was 24 and had clearly been told who I was, and did the thing where he wouldn't say a number out loud without smiling first. 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, a bathroom with a window in it, and a front door with a good lock on the inside, which I checked, because of course I checked. I stood in the middle of the living room for about 6 minutes. It was a good flat. That's the honest truth. It was exactly what I'd wanted from about the age of 19. Nobody knowing, nobody watching, my own hours, my own seals on my own food, and a door I controlled. I could see the whole of it laid out, a desk by the window, 11 o'clock at night, and nothing happening. Nothing happening on Sunday either. Do you want to see the storage? Said the agent. No, thank you. It comes with a parking space. It's a good flat, I said. Somebody should have it. I bought it. I want to be clear that I did not tell Dana for 4 days, and when I did, she went completely still in a way that made me talk faster than I've ever talked in my life. And by the time I got to the end of the sentence, she had turned around and was walking out of the kitchen. The end of the sentence was, and I put it in Ren's name because she's been paying $1,100 a month for a place with a boiler that screams. She stopped in the doorway with no door. Say the last bit again. Ren's name. You bought a flat, Dana said, and gave it to the 24-year-old. Yes. The one who says, oh, on the phone. She's 24 and she calls me the client in meetings on purpose to annoy me, I said. Also, she cried, which I found unbearable, and then she said the storage unit was inadequate. Dana came back into the kitchen, took my face in both hands, the one with the scar and the one without, and said, you are the strangest man I have ever met, and I would like you to stop buying property in silence. That's the only one. Kai, that is genuinely the only one. The Marlowe claim settled in October. 2.5 years after a man called Errol told me he'd sung. There were 14 names on it by then. The county's insurer settled without admitting anything, which is what they do, and the money split 14 ways, and it was not a large amount per person, and it was never really about that. Errol used his to fix a car and take his daughters to Florida, and sent me 11 photographs of a queue for a roller coaster. I gave mine away before it landed, which sounds like a gesture and wasn't. I'd have had to declare it and think about it and put it somewhere, and I didn't want it in the same account as anything else I own. It went to a charity that puts advocates in care homes, people whose entire job is to be the adult who is not employed by the building. There's a paragraph in the settlement about Pratt. She had dementia by then and was in no state to answer anything, and the file says what the file says. and I have never been able to decide whether her not knowing is a mercy or a theft. What I did keep was a photocopy of one page, the night log. 2 dates in March, my name in a column and a woman's initials next to the word secured. It's in the box with the letter. Ren tried to resign in August, not because of the flat, because a clearing house in Frankfurt offered her a title with the word head in it, and about 3 times what we were paying her, and she came into the office with a printout and her chin up and the whole speech prepared. I let her get 4 sentences in. You're not resigning, you're negotiating, and you're bad at it because you brought the printout. I brought the printout so you'd know it's real. It's real. Take it if you want it. Frankfurt's a good city, and that's a good clearing house, and I'll write you a reference that gets you the office with the window. I put the coffee down in front of her. Or stay, and I'll give you 19% of the company, and the technical side runs under your name, not mine, and the paper you wrote gets a second author line that says lead because that's what you were. She sat there for a while. 19. And in about 4 years you'll buy me out and I'll go and look at a lake. You'd hate a lake, I'd hate a lake, I agreed. She stayed. Her mother made dumplings about it and brought 11 boxes to the office. And Dana ate 4 of them standing up in a meeting room and asked for the recipe, which was, I later understood, an act of pure strategy because the 2 of them are now in a book club and it has entirely destroyed my ability to have a private life. On the 3rd anniversary of Edward Crane's death, Dana had the clearing key reissued. I found out because a man from the platform's key management unit came to the house on a Thursday with a case and 2 forms, and Dana was standing in the hall in a coat holding hers. 2 halves, she said. The old one's dead. This one needs both to authorize a freeze. I looked at the case. Who's got the second half? You are looking at a man holding a form with his own name on it, so I'd say the answer is available to you. Dana, sign it. You can't put half a clearing key in the hands of a man you married in a holding room. I did that at the beginning, she said. This is administrative, and I stood in that hallway with a plastic case open on a table, and I thought about a woman pledging her dead husband's fob against a bail bond on a Saturday for a man she'd said 40 words to, and about $800 million, and about a login code at 3:58 in the morning. And I understood properly, not as a fact, but as a thing that had happened to me that she had never once in 3 years done a single deal on the basis of what I had proved. I signed it. My hand was steady, and this time it didn't feel like a betrayal of anything. I keep mine in a drawer in Faro Hill under a photocopy of a night log. She still keeps hers in a coat pocket with her lip balm, because some things you don't fix. Dwight retired in the spring. 11 years and 4 months, a commendation nobody had asked for, and a leaving due in a function room above a pub in Bradbury with 40 probation officers and a buffet that he criticized to my face for 20 minutes. We paid for the room. He found out and was appalled and made us stop telling people. You'll be wanting this back, he said at the end of the night, and handed me a small paper bag, and inside it was a brass latch tongue with 4 screws in a sandwich bag, which he had apparently taken off a study desk in Faro Hill during the 2nd week of April 3 years earlier, and kept in his glove box ever since, next to where the most valuable object in the city had spent 19 days under some coffee. Why did you take it? Because you'd left it on a desk where you could see it, said Dwight. And I've been doing this 11 years. And men who keep the thing they broke out of tend to break out of the next one, too. Then he ate a sausage roll and told me the buffet was a disgrace. He comes on Sundays. He has opinions about the machine, about the pear tree on the north side, which he says is planted too close to the wall, and about my driving. His daughter did a term of work experience at Ren's technical desk, and now writes fraud rules for a living, which Dwight describes as a tragedy he blames me for personally. I saw Lydia once more, and it was nothing. And I'm putting it here because a version of this story exists where it's a scene and I want to kill that version. Airport. Terminal 2. The long corridor after security where everybody walks the same speed. She was going one way and I was going the other with a coffee in my hand, and Ren 4 steps behind me arguing about a rule set. We passed at about 1.5 meters. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us stopped and neither of us said anything, and the whole thing took 1.5 seconds. And then Ren said, so if we exclude the internal transfers, the false positive rate halves. And I said, then exclude them. And that was it. I got about 30 steps down the corridor before my hand started, and Ren noticed and didn't mention it, which is the single kindest thing anybody has done for me in a public place. She teaches now, apparently. Corporate ethics at a business school in another country on a 2-year visiting contract. I found that out by accident, and I have never once looked her up on purpose. And I'd like a medal for that. And nobody's giving me one. We went back to Halden Street on a Tuesday in June, not for a wedding. I need to be precise about this, because people hear, we went back and start imagining a dress and an aisle and somebody's aunt filming in portrait mode. The paperwork from the holding room was valid. It had been valid for 3 years. What it did not have was any of the parts that people do at the front, the appointment, the 2 witnesses, the reading of the thing out loud by a clerk in a gray blazer. Because we'd done it in a county facility at 6:10 in the evening with a bail form on top of it. Dana raised it in March, once, in the car, in about 9 words. I'd like the version where somebody reads it out. The whole thing, the part in the middle, not the rest. So, Tuesday, 11:15, second floor of the city building on Halden Street. 2 witnesses, because you need 2. Dwight, who wore a suit that had last been worn to his brother's funeral and told us so, and Ren, who cried at 11:16 and denied it at 11:17. Ren's mother came, uninvited, with food. That's the guest list. 5 people, one of whom was there for the food. The clerk was the same woman. I recognized her before we got to the desk, and she recognized me at about the same moment. And there was a very bad 4 seconds where neither of us knew what the form was for that. "You're the yes." "Right," she said. She looked at the file, and then at Dana, and then she squared her shoulders in a way I found extremely moving for no reason I can defend. "Well, we'll do it properly this time." 2 forms on the desk. That's the bit that got me. 2 sheets of paper slid across with 1 finger, the way they'd been slid across a table in a room that smelled of floor cleaner. Except this time, neither of them was a bail undertaking. And the second one had a line about witnesses instead of a line about responsible parties, and nowhere on either page did the phrase blood relative or spouse appear, because I had one of those now, and it was standing next to me in a gray dress, with her hand in her pocket where the key is. She read it out. The clerk, the part in the middle, out loud, in a room with a radiator ticking in it and a queue of 4 people outside waiting for name changes. Dana signed first. I want that recorded. 3 years earlier, I'd asked to go second because my hands were shaking and it ended up in a newspaper. And this time, she picked up the pen before the clerk had finished the sentence and signed first hard, the way she does everything, and slid it over. I signed second on purpose. Then Dwight said, "Do we clap?" And Ren said, "No," and clapped. And the clerk said the next appointment was at past. We were out of the building by 11:34. 29 minutes door to door. There was no dinner. There was a table on a pavement outside a place on Kelso Street that does one thing well, and 5 people, and Ren's mother's containers, which she opened and put in the middle of the table without asking anybody. And I ate out of one of them without checking a seal, in public, in daylight, with my hands steady. Nobody at that table said a word about it. I'd bet money that 4 of them noticed. 30 meters is the last thing. There's a paint mark on the gravel at Faro Hill, white, about the size of a hand, 4 steps short of the pear tree, and I put it there with a tin from the garage on the 32nd day so that we could stop setting off an alarm every time we wanted to sit down. It's still there. We've had the drive resurfaced twice, and both times I've gone out with the tin afterwards. Dana asked me about it in the autumn, sitting on the bench under the tree with her shoes off. You could let it go now. I could. You resurface a drive and then paint the mark back on it. I do. Why? I thought about giving her the good answer. There is one, and it's about knowing where the edge of a thing is, and it's true. And it's the kind of line that sounds finished. Because on the first night, I couldn't get past it, I said. And now I can. And I'd like to be able to see the difference from the kitchen window. She put her feet up on the bench. That's almost a nice sentence. It's the best I've got. It'll do. We sat there for a while. The tree does nothing, still. It's a pear tree. There were pears that year, small and hard, and not worth eating, and Dwight said it was because of the wall. I walked her back up to the house at about 11 and stopped at the mark on the way I do, 4 steps short, and she waited for me on the other side of it with her hands in her pockets. Then she said, "Come on," and I came on, last one, then I'll leave it. The window on the top floor at Faro Hill looks south, and on a clear night you can see the city as a low orange smear with the 2 towers on Vessel Street in the middle of it, one of which has her name on the lease, and one of which used to have a fund called Peller Group on the 11th floor, and now has a firm that does something with logistics software. She stood at that window in December with a glass she wasn't drinking, and I came up behind her and she took my wrist. Not my hand, my wrist. She did it on purpose. 3 years of never doing it, of the palm and the fingers and the flat of it, of a woman who had worked out in 11 minutes standing in a corridor exactly where a man could be touched. And then in December, at a window, she reached back without looking and closed her scarred hand around my wrist and held it there. I didn't move. We stood like that for a while, and she said, "There," in the voice she uses for a coupon coming down 11 basis points, and I said something unrepeatable, and she laughed, ugly, into the glass. That's it. That's the whole thing. A monitor came off my ankle on a Tuesday morning at 9:20, and 3 years later, a woman held my wrist at a window, and I stayed exactly where I was. The Lisbon filing went to the Portuguese regulator on a Wednesday, and their market unit opened a file, and 11 months later 2 people were charged and a holding structure in Luxembourg was unwound. And I gave 4 hours of testimony by video link from a room in Faro Hill with a repainted shelf behind me. Their 4 minutes past the hour man was a contractor who'd worked one summer at Orthvale in 2019 and had learned the trick from somebody, and he would not say who. And he is not going to say who. Because there is nothing on earth as loyal as a man who thinks the loyalty is being noticed. In February, a package came to the house with no sender on it. Inside was a single sheet, printed, no signature. A log extract from a system I've never had access to, from a bank I've never worked with, in a country I've never been to. Every entry 4 minutes past the hour. And a compliment slip at the bottom, blank except for 2 words in handwriting I didn't recognize and have not been able to match to anything. Your move. Ren wanted to know why I was smiling over video from an office with a window she'd chosen herself. I'm not smiling. You're doing the thing where your hands go still, she said. Send me the page. I put the kettle on and sat down with it, and Dana came in and read it over my shoulder, and neither of us said anything for a minute. The handwriting was small, slanted, and pressed hard enough to emboss the back of the slip. I turned it over and held it up to the window like an idiot, and there was nothing there except the shape of 2 words in a hand I'd never seen. Then she went and got her coat off the hook, and put her hand in the pocket, and put half a clearing key on the table next to the page. Well, she said, get the other one.